Hi everyone, you're watching the virtual Amicus and I am Jay Lodha. Well, today's topic for discussion would be on working in policy as a lawyer. And joining us today on the virtual Amicus is somebody who is a highly respected, highly regarded academic. He's an intellectual. So we are in conversation with Mr. Ameya Ashok Naik, who will be dealing with this topic. And just to give you all a brief introduction about our Amicus for today's session, he's a policy decision professional. He's a policy design professional, I beg your pardon, with over a decade of experience in policy research, analysis, advocacy, and evaluation. He started his career as a speechwriter for Dr. Shashi Tharoor. While at graduate school, he was a researcher with the program on negotiation at Harvard Law School, the United Nations Department of Peacekeeping Operations, the World Peace Foundation, and the International Peace Institute. After returning to India in 2017, he worked in a policy and regulatory support role at Tata Sons. Since 2019, he has been a policy manager at E-Governments Foundation, a non-profit that makes open source software for local governments. He's also a faculty fellow at the Takshashila Institution, where he teaches policy analysis and an editorial consultant for the International Growth Center at the London School of Economics. He holds a BA in psychology from St. Xavier's College, Mumbai, an LLB from GLC Mumbai, a PG diploma in international humanitarian law from Nalsar, and a dual MA in law and diplomacy and L.L.M in international law from the Fletcher School at Tufts University. Wow, what an introduction. So thank you so much, sir, for readily saying yes, for your kind consent, for readily saying yes for doing a session on working in policy as a lawyer. Anything that you wish to say about our channel before we quickly start with the Q&A segment?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. It's so great to be here, and thank you for inviting me. I think what you have going with the virtual Amicus is a really great initiative because there's only so much that one can get into in like a purely professional forum, or there's only so much that one can get into in an official forum. And so it's a really valuable service to sort of be collating questions, collating ideas, finding people to speak on them, bringing them together like this. So I wish you best of luck with the channel, and great to be here and speaking with you.
Well, thank you so much there, sir, for all your kind words. Really means a lot to me and my team. So to all the viewers who are watching, we have divided our segment, this session, in two parts. In the first segment, we'll be covering policy. And then the next segment, which is segment number 2, we'll be covering the L.L.M Master's Program from the Fletcher School at Tufts University. So let's quickly start with our Q&A segment, segment 1, which is policy. Sir, if you could please discuss the role of a policy design professional. Who exactly is a policy design professional or a policy manager? Now, since you've worked for more than a decade in the area of policy research, analysis, advocacy, and evaluation, if you could talk us through this incredible journey and how you started the same.
Sure. So public policy is potentially a very broad field. Um, it's not something that only happens in New Delhi or in state capitals or anything. It's playing out all around us every day. At a very broad level, I would say the work of public policy is trying to enable peace and development at whatever scale. It can be local, it can be regional, it can be national, it can be global. The main actors almost perforce are governments. Right? The main people who are working on policy issues are the governments of the various countries, states, cities, etc., etc. You also have international organizations like the UN or development banks like the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, etc. You have big international philanthropies and non-profit organizations, right? So it's like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for instance, or like the Global Fund, which is like a big non-profit that works on public health. You also have academics, researchers, think tanks who look at various policy questions and try to come up with, okay, what exactly is the problem? What do we recommend should be done about it? If something is being done about it, is it working? Is it not? So when I say I worked in policy evaluation, that's basically trying to get a sense of, is this policy actually doing what we want it to do or not? And you have lots of local civil society organizations and NGOs as well, right? So on one level, all of us will know somebody who is working, say, a charitable enterprise in providing education or in providing, let's say, some sort of supplementary healthcare or access to healthcare. So if I stretch, I take the full spectrum of the definition. Even what they do is somewhere in the development and assistance space, right? For me personally, yeah, so I started working with Dr. Tharoor, which means I got to see what working inside government is like. Then I went to the master's program. So there I got to do a lot of course, studying, but also research, mainly focused on UN peacekeeping and post-conflict accountability and post-conflict development. Though again, I mean, we got to do research for courses and for like projects on various other topics as well. At Tata Sons, when I came back, they were setting up a new macroeconomics and policy advocacy team. So Tata Sons had long had an economics and statistics team that did economics research. They wanted to change the mandate a little and say, let's also look at like regulatory affairs. Let's also look at geopolitics. Let's also look at overall development trends in India and where specific opportunities might lie within that. So I worked on the research side of that. Right? I had colleagues who knew what the Tata Group's companies were interested in, what their strategies were, and what they might want to work on. We were giving them input saying, globally, nationally, geopolitically, in a particular sector, here is the kind of developments that are happening, and then they would figure out how they wanted to respond to those. One thing that did happen when I was at Tata Sons is that the RBI introduced the data localization circular or notification, where they said that anybody who was dealing with, especially financial institutions that were dealing with data of Indian citizens, must physically locate that data at a place in India. And there was disagreement over can they take copies abroad, who can access it, etc., etc. Up to that point, I had not really worked on data policy per se, but it sort of became, from there on, it sort of become a sort of uh, definitely an interest, a semi specialization of mine, basically because the data protection and privacy law story has been playing out over the past 6 or 7 years as I've been working in this space in India. And then from 2019, when I've been at eGov, I basically get to advise or give recommendations to government as well as to other NGOs and civil society organizations on how they can use digital tools and platforms for the work that they are trying to do. So today I'm sort of a tech policy specialist. But I mean, I mentioned what I studied and researched to start with, to say I didn't start out there. It just so happens that the field sort of grew that way, and I had the opportunity to grow in it as well. So let me pause there. That's sort of an overview of.
Fantastic, sir. Now, sir, going ahead with our next question. So instead of working for a law firm or building a career as an in-house counsel or as a litigator, which is obviously the most popular choice, you chose instead to have a career in policy. Why so?
It's almost a philosophical question, right? So one of my professors in grad school is a man who was the lead author of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, the year that they actually won the Nobel Peace Prize. So in that capacity, he's a Nobel Peace Laureate. And we asked him a similar question. We'd sort of gone out to coffee, a small group of students with him. And we asked him that question because he had a full career as like a chemist and a physicist, then an entire time as a science policy analyst, and then a third career as a faculty at the school, right? And what he said was, I'm quoting roughly, but what he said was, I believe that all of us get to make some amount of impact in life. Okay. You can make a life-changing impact for one or a small number of individuals. So doctors literally save people's lives. Depending on the situation you're in, a lawyer can make a huge difference to their specific client's life. Or you can make a tiny change at a very large scale, right? There's no right or wrong choice here. And over the course of your career, probably you'll get to do more than one, you'll get to move along this spectrum. So the question is, what do you find fulfilling in your career at a given point of time? And for me, from very early on, I liked debating, I liked writing, I liked research. Very early on, I mean, probably from like high school, it was clear to me that I want to work on rules and institutions and policies, tiny change at large scale, right? Um, and so I always thought that I would work in policy at least for the bulk of my career. At some point, I might also switch to something that is more individually focused, counseling, teaching, something like that. Uh, in India, if you want to work in policy, the primary path, as I said, the people who mainly do this work are government, right? So the primary path is the civil services exam. So which is what I was doing. I don't know if you remember back in law school. I was not interning. I was actually in like the Maharashtra Government Civil Services Coaching Institute in parallel with GLC. Uh, and the only thing with the UPSC is that you also have to set yourself some kind of personal limit, because it is possible to keep pursuing and keep pursuing and keep pursuing. And there are many people who will keep writing the exam year on year on year. I personally said I'll try till I'm age 25. Once I'm 25, I will start looking, and if I haven't cleared it by then, I'll start looking at other options as well, because more than 1 or 2 gap years starts making the future career more complicated. So I'll try and balance it that way. Uh, yeah. So long answer to say, I work in policy because I want to work. I want to make things change at like that sort of large scale. And I work in policy in an NGO because I tried to work in government and wasn't able to make it. And so this is the next viable path that opened up.
Very well, sir. And now going ahead with our next question. So you started your career, your illustrious career as a speech writer for Dr. Shashi Tharoor. So how was the experience like, and what all lessons did you learn from that incredible opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely lucky to get that job because that was actually my first full-time job. I worked as Dr. Tharoor's assistant, so it was actually a sort of a mix of general admin, communications, and speech writing. Um, it was really hectic, certainly, and in fact, uh, a couple of months after I started working with him, he was appointed to the Ministry of HRD. He was Deputy Minister of HRD towards the end of his tenure in sort of 2012 to 14. So I moved to the ministry with him. So as a result, I got to see what a government ministry's working looks like from the inside, which is very valuable because you have to understand the process and you have to understand who is responsible for what if you want to be able to help them, if you want to be able to navigate that. Uh, of course, the speech writing part was really fun. And in effect, for me, it was like I was getting personalized writing coaching, right? Because I would write something and then I would get feedback on it almost immediately. And then we would do another version, I would get feedback on that. And do another version, I'd get feedback on that. And it was really easy to tell if I was getting better or not getting better, because if I was doing well, there'd be very little feedback. It'd just be like, good, I can use this. And if I was not doing well, then it would be like, no, like, entire passage struck through, like, this is not the right idea, try again. Go look at this. I used this in this other speech earlier. See if you can find that, use that here. So it was very interactive. We actually developed a lot of those speeches together. I would say if you hear Dr. Tharoor speak in public, on average, you are hearing like draft 10 or draft 12 of the speech. Uh, he really invests effort into what he wants to say. Uh, and so for me, and like for that being my first job, I think I was already a good writer, but the craft and the practice and the discipline of going through versions, going through revisions, filtering on the exact thing that you want to say, I think I really learned that from that experience.
What an incredible experience it must have been for you, sir. Now, talking about psychology, you pursued a BA in psychology before studying law. So why psychology, and did it help you later on in your career?
uh why psychology? Because I love the subject. I chose, in fact, I studied ICSE board humanities, 11th and 12th standard, because I wanted to study psychology. And I had like decent marks in math, decent marks in science, decent marks in computer science. So it was a bit of a fight at home actually to be able to say, no, I'm not taking 11th and 12th science. I'm actually taking humanities instead. But luckily, I mean, my parents eventually agreed. And I mean, I absolutely love the subject. It's still what I love studying. It's still what I love reading about. Still what I love writing about. When I was in the 12th, this was actually before CLAT had come into place. I think CLAT started just a year or two after I finished class 12. So I would have had to write individual law school entrance exams if I wanted to do that. And I was actually like looking up the forms for those in the school library. And one of my teachers saw that and actually came and like she asked to speak to my mother and me and counseled us saying, look, you have a topic, like you have a subject that you're interested in, study it, explore it in depth. You can always go and do a 3-year LLB after, which is in fact what I did. And like that 1 year's difference is not going to make, you know, it doesn't matter. Like when you're 18, it feels like, oh God, one more year, right? Because, okay, you've been alive 18 years, 6 years is a quarter of your life, right? But like by the time you're 25, whether you did a 5-year or a 6-year course, you know, it even took a gap year in between, it will all sort of even out, right? And I think that was like really timely advice, and I'm still very grateful for that. And that is in fact what I did. I basically did like the 3-year BA and then decided to do the LLB. It also helped me with the UPSC at that point because I could take psychology and law as my elective subjects. And like I'd already studied in that sense. I'd done like the full BA in psych. It was easy for me to write the papers in that.
So please talk
Oh,
us.
sorry. I also wanted to say, because the other half of your question was like, does this help in daily life or like in career right now? No. Yes, absolutely. Right. So I'll give you just 2 or 3 examples. Right. Um, the main skill that you learn when you study counseling in psychology is what is called active listening. Eh? It's a very simple skill, but it needs attention and practice. So active listening is you take in what the other person is saying, you organize it, you rephrase it, you reflect it back to them, and you say, "This is what I heard you saying. Do you think that's accurate?" And you use this to get deeper and deeper. Right? You don't just say, "This is what I heard you saying." You say, "This is what I heard you saying," and it seemed to me like the emotion associated with that was, or it seemed to me that the underlying idea that you were getting at was, and this helps you get. It's surprising, but actually, if you do this in a dedicated way for even a 15 to 20-minute conversation, you can get from a very surface level to a very meaningful conversation, right? So this makes me a better facilitator, uh, just in general. Anytime I'm in a conversation with, where there's some significant outcome that we want, I can use the active listening skill to say, okay, let me guide it towards whether I have a particular outcome in mind or not. I know that we want to arrive at a certain decision by the end of that conversation. So let me guide it to the point where somebody feels equipped to take that decision, right? Then in what else? In cognitive psychology, you study the concept of cognitive bias. So this is Daniel Kahneman passed away recently, Nobel laureate in economics. The thing that he got the Nobel Prize for is his work on cognitive biases. Right? The book is called Thinking Fast and Slow. If you picked it up at some point, if not, highly recommend it to all of your viewers. It's a great read. As a psychologist and a researcher, I know that my research can never be unbiased. Right? So when a psychologist says bias, it just means your brain works in certain ways. Right? You're a human being, you were raised by other human beings, you learned certain things, you picked up certain habits, see, you're biased, you unconsciously follow those. Right? It's not biased in the sense of you are partial towards someone. It's biased in the sense of your brain is going to pay attention to some things and not to others. So as a researcher, I can actually apply tools and techniques to identify and counteract bias in my own work. Right? Which means that like confirmation biases, once you come to a conclusion, you're not going to look for any contrary evidence. Right? There are techniques that you can use to actually check for and reduce confirmation bias. Right? And because I know the underlying science, I know to actually think, I know that this is the appropriate time to actually try and apply some of these and see if my conclusion is really robust or am I missing out on some counter evidence, right? So there's lots of examples like this, and we can do an entire segment on just psychology and policy. But just to say, yes, absolutely helpful.
Now, sir, if you could talk about your experiences at Harvard Law School and United Nations since you worked there.
Sure. So the way that grad school in the US works is you usually do summer internships, right? So you finish your spring semester, and then before the next fall semester starts, you have 3 to 4 months to do an internship. I got a summer research fellowship from the program on negotiation at Harvard Law School, which basically enabled me then to take up an internship with the UN Department of Peacekeeping in New York. UN internships are not paid, at least most of them are not. And living in New York is not particularly cheap. So it was basically the funding from the program on negotiation that let me take up that role. I worked with a unit called the Security Sector Reform Unit, which basically looks at how military, police, paramilitary, other security forces are controlled and governed. What role do they play in conflict? What role do they play in reducing conflict? What role do they play in a new government that has been formed after a conflict has taken place? So there is an entire body of literature on security sector reform that says this is how you should organize your civilian authorities and your military authorities, how they should interact with each other. The security sector reform unit basically supports governments and peace processes in doing that. So what I got to do was I got to do research on places in which UN peace operations have actually been able to work with non-state armed groups, rebel forces or fighters, and actually apply some of the security sector reform literature so that the amount of actual armed conflict or violence is reduced, right? So it's territory that is held by a rebel group. It's not under the control of the government, but the rebel group is acting as the de facto government. And there are situations in which UN or other workers are able to work with them and say, here's how you can run things in this space, such that recognizing that you're fighting a civil war, but still in your territory, there are ways to keep things more peaceful, more just, more, less violent, which is, it's kind of at the frontiers of international law, because international law typically deals with the actions of states, right? And so dealing with how do you get non-state armed groups to abide by international humanitarian law or to abide by security sector governance is sort of a frontier research topic. And yeah, that's basically what I got to work on there.
Wow, what an incredible experience it must have turned out to be.
Absolutely. I love that work as well. That's actually what I did my master's thesis on. I looked at peace operations in the Darfur region in Sudan and how they were able to balance the Sudanese government, foreign entities, the non-state armed groups there. Where were they able to actually build some little areas of relative peace versus where did it not work?
So did you get an opportunity to even visit Sudan, or was it just?
No, I did not get to go to the field. If I had been able to translate that internship and that research into actually working at the UN, I would in fact have probably done field work there. This was all remote and desk work, but I did get to interact with people who had been in the field, including through the UN.
Wow. And so, talking about your experience at Takshashila Institution, which is a very prestigious institution, you've been a faculty fellow there. So, what subjects did you teach there, and how was the experience there?
So Takshashila teaches a flagship 12-week certificate course in public policy, the graduate certificate in public policy or GCPP. I actually took that course back in 2012, which was the first year that they were teaching it. This was sort of my UPSC prep gap year, so it fit in quite nicely then. although like before the final exam of the course was when I got the job with Dr. Tharoor. So that final August, September month of that year was really, really hectic. It was new job, GCPB final exam, and civil services mains all at once. Um, but since then, I've sort of stayed affiliated with Takshila. I've done research with them. Since 2019, I've been teaching the policy analysis course as part of this graduate certificate in public policy. They've also introduced a year-long PG program, like a PG diploma in public policy. There also I teach policy analysis. And what I was saying at the start of the talk, right? Public policy is not something that happens in Delhi. It's something that's happening every day around you and me. We are participating in it. That is the main orientation or the main goal of the uh, policy analysis course at Takshashila, right? Is to get people to recognize the ways in which public policy is actually playing out all around them with their participation, and to equip them with concepts, tools, frameworks, examples, evidence that they can use to be more active citizens. Right? So we say that the course is A, for people who want to be analysts, but B, it's for people who want to be active citizens or change makers. Right? The motto from back in 2012 has always been transforming India is a marathon, not a sprint, and do this course in order to run the marathon to transform India. Yeah, so we teach policy analysis broadly. I have colleagues who teach economics for policy analysis. I have colleagues who teach writing for policy. And then people choose specialization. So there's a tech policy specialization. There's a health and biosciences and like biosciences policy specialization. There's a security studies specialization. I teach the advanced public policy specialization. So the like deeper level course of again, how do you apply game theory, economic theory, public choice theory, a lot of principles that go into policy design and assessment. How do you apply those to think about whether a particular policy is good, bad, likely to succeed, likely to fail, likely to have unintended consequences? How do you predict all of that? And of course, how do you write about it and tell people about it?
Very well, sir. And lastly, sir, last question of our segment one, which is policy. What would be your piece of advice to all the young law students, lawyers who wish to build a successful career like you have in this field of policy? And do you think that pursuing law is mandatory to build a successful career in policy because you pursued law? And do lawyers have an edge over other professionals in this field?
Yeah, so let me take the second part of the question first, right? There is no one path into public policy because again, public policy can span a whole lot of things. So my colleagues today have done economics, MBA. Many of them, of course, are like computer scientists and software engineers because I work for a firm that makes open source software. But even at Takshashila, for instance, I have colleagues who are engineers. I have colleagues who are historians. I do have colleagues who are lawyers. I have colleagues who are economists, colleagues who've done psychology, so on and so forth. Even when I was at Fletcher, I would say that like my classmates came from like a variety of different, everything from like anthropology to like astrophysics to music theory. I mean, it was a full range. That said, there are two fields which lend themselves relatively naturally to the study of public policy. One is economics, because policy decision making is basically deciding how do you allocate resources between different priorities. Right? What is the budget of India? The budget is the government saying, I'm putting so much resources into this and so much resources into this. Right? Or at least saying, I intend to put. Then you have a comparison at the end of the year. And economics is basically the science of studying the allocation of scarce resources. Right? So the economic theory is useful. And even at Takshashila, we do say that like you don't have to be an economist to work in policy, but you do have to understand economics. You should study it and have a basic grasp of it. And the other is law, because the way in which most policy actually gets formulated and done is through laws, it's through legislation, it's through regulation. It might be through it might be like court-made law. It might be through like jurisprudence or precedent. Uh, a lot of it is also administrative law. But definitely, I think not so much the advocacy side of law, but say constitutional law, contract law, administrative law, for that matter, even things like property law, commercial law, company law, all of these are helpful because all of these give you a good basis for thinking about how does the government actually go about doing something. And therefore, if I think something should be done, what is the pathways in which it could happen, right? Uh, that said, I think for anyone who is looking to work in policy, uh, again, think of what it would mean to be a more active citizen based on your skills, based on your circumstances, based on your interests. Try to be a more active citizen in that area that interests you. Right? If you are really interested in education and you want to volunteer somewhere in the education sector, start there. Right? Because getting a good understanding of a sector that you have an interest in is a great place to start. Build on your experiences there to say, okay, like this is what I'm experiencing in the place where I'm volunteering, right? These are the kinds of children who are coming. This is the background they come from. This is the kind of challenges that they face. Okay, maybe the school where you're volunteering, there are many children who come in who are the children of daily wage laborers who have migrated, let's say, from somewhere in Odisha. Okay, what are the challenges that they are facing? Who is responding to those? What is your city government doing about migrant worker welfare or like the children of migrant workers? Right? Is there a language barrier? Is somebody working on that? Um, I'm borrowing these examples from one of my students in the 1 year public policy course right now. This is the problem that that student is working on, right? Uh, so the minute you make that switch from okay, I'm going to teach, I'm going to volunteer for 1 hour and teach these kids, to I'm going to be curious about what is happening in their lives and what are the structures, what are the rules, can anything shift there? You're already making the switch into sort of a policy mindset, right? You may or may not get to work on it full time professionally. You will definitely find ways to do something that will make a difference to that problem. Okay. And the other thing I would say is that there is no linear career in public policy. Again, barring you clear the civil services exam, you go to work for your government. And by all means, for people who are like, at an age where they can write the civil services exam, if you want to do that, please do. Just set a cap, right? Say that you will take like 2 attempts or 3 attempts and then look for other alternatives if it doesn't work. Don't chase it endlessly. Uh, but other than people who get into government, most of us who work in public policy have like diagonal careers, like we hop from one thing to the other. Uh, it's very rare to see somebody who's worked with one organization for like 20, 30 years. Uh, and that's normal for this field.
So that brings us to the end of session one, which was on policy. Now, sir, if you're ready, can we start with our segment two, which is on
Sure.
the master's program at Tufts University?
Sure.
So let's quickly start. Can't wait to start the segment two. So, question number one of segment two. At what stage of your LLB course did you decide to study further, pursue the master's program? If you can talk us through the entire phases in when you decided during law school days to pursue a master's program.
Yeah. So it's not even law school proper, right? Like I was saying, my uh, plan A was clear the civil services, join the Indian Foreign Services, right? So what I was working towards was actually preparing for the civil services. Uh, but plan B, right? My dad was a naval officer, and one of the things that he taught us was you should always have backup plans. You should always have contingency plans. So the backup plan was at age 25, if civil services doesn't work, how do you go and work in public policy next? And what is the kind of policy that you want to work on? Right? I was interested in this sort of like, peacekeeping, conflict resolution, etc. There are not too many opportunities to work on that within India. There are a few places that you can study it, and there are actually more international relations programs in India today than there were, a decade or a decade and a half ago. Um, but there are still limited work opportunities. And so for me, the masters, especially going abroad for the masters, was always a backup plan, right? By age 24, 25, given that, so I'd cleared the prelims every time I wrote the exam, I'd never cleared the mains. And I wasn't ranking like very high even in the mains, right? Like I was still quite far from the kind of ranking that you would need to get called for the foreign services. So at that point, I was like, okay, now I should start, taking the GRE exam. I should start preparing, like at least doing research and shortlisting what schools I want to go to, things like that. And then, yeah, like around 2012, I basically put that plan into action.
Going ahead with our next question, sir. If you could, in a nutshell, tell us when is the applicant required to start with the preparation, and how important is a robust CV, the statement of purpose, good grades, internship. How important are all of these for the purpose of building a good application for securing admission?
So it's been a while since I did the applications and stuff. So don't quote me on, like, I guess most schools have application deadlines somewhere between October and December. And they start giving you like early decisions probably by March. And then like you have to finally commit to go by April. And then at least in the US, your semester usually starts around August. I think UK, Europe, it's a little later,
Yes.
around September. Um, I'm not as familiar with Australia, New Zealand, Canada. Canada, I think its timelines are pretty similar to the US. Australia, New Zealand, I'm not too sure. Um, uh, when do you start preparing? I mean, in one sense, you should probably like start doing your research and shortlisting and like talking to alumni of those schools, especially recent alumni, especially if there are recent alumni of those schools from where your own college was or something like that. You should probably start talking to those people ballpark a year before you plan to apply, right? Because you'll get lots of information. You will have to think through your plans. It's nice to have 8, 9, 10 months to sort of think through that and make a decision. Um, on the application itself, right? I uh, I was a interviewer for the admissions office. They had opportunity for students to volunteer to interview prospective students, partly as like an information sharing mechanism. What's the course like? Partly to evaluate, do you think this person would do well as a part of your community, right? So let me share what the admissions office told us when we were being interviewers, right? They said we care about two things. One, do you think this person has overall the skills, capabilities, competencies to be able to take these courses and like thrive in this environment? Hmm. And two, do you think that once they graduate, they will do good work in this field, based on which, the name and the reputation of the school will also be enhanced by association with these people and the work that they do, right? Um, so whatever it is that you're putting in your application, you're really just trying to establish these two things. I have the baseline level of competence to take these courses and benefit from them. And I'm going to take the skills that I take from this and do good work that will, school ka naam roshan karega in the future, right? Um, how do you illustrate that? You illustrate that you have the competence through a combination of your academic grades, any standardized exams, so like GRE, GMAT, whatever, if any of those have to be taken. Um, and if you have work experience, whatever is in your CV from your professional experience, and your letters of recommendation, right? And how do you demonstrate that you're going to do good work after the course? Mainly it's your SOP or your application essays, right? Your statement of motivation. Why do you want to do that course? What are your plans? How is it going to help you? It's also to some extent your CV, if you have a track record, and it's your letters of recommendation again, right? So like if you say which one of these things is the most important, none, right? It's no one thing in isolation. The whole thing as a package has to establish these two things, right? And by the way, that also means that if like you think you're doing badly on any one of these things, it shouldn't worry you too much, right? So again, you might remember what exams and grades and corrections in Mumbai University law faculty were like, right? My law school grades are not great. There are papers that I failed and eventually passed, right? Um, but when I was applying, I had my BA. I had a decent grade. Like I had a first class pass in my BA, right? I had the NALSA RPG diploma by then. And luckily, I was actually like a national merit ranker in that. I had a really good GRE score. I had like whatever, like 99th percentile GRE score, right? And I got a letter of recommendation from one of our GLC professors. And he was kind enough to say, like, ignore his grades. His grades don't really reflect his understanding of the subject. So he put in like a vote of confidence for me, right? So between those, I was like, even if my law school grades show, even like I said, I failed papers, I still wasn't worried because I was saying I have enough alternative points of evidence to say this person still has the competencies and the skills, right? So yeah, in a nutshell, you need all of these together and you need all of them to basically show these two things. You do well there and you do well after. And beyond that, look, you can't control who else is applying in your year, right? It's the more popular the school, the more competitive the application is going to be. Uh, most admissions counselors will also tell you sort of choose a nice spread of schools, right? Choose some that are really ambitious, choose some that are relatively safe. Uh, within 1 to 2 attempts, you'll probably be able to get a program at a school that you like, that you think will help you advance your career.
So not any particular thing in isolation. It has to be a collective package that has to impress them.
Absolutely.
Fantastic, sir. So now, why Tufts University, sir? And what all courses are available? If you could talk us through, and if you could also talk about the examination pattern then and how rigorous was it?
So in fact, so you said in the intro I have a dual degree from Fletcher, right? I actually went to Fletcher for the 2-year MA. So
Whoa.
their flagship degree is the MA in Law and Diplomacy. It's the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. So it's their original named MA. While I was there, I actually got the chance to transition to the dual degree program, and so I graduated with both the MA and the LLM.
Mm.
But in practice, you take the same courses, right? Because in any policy school in the US, you have a great deal of flexibility in choosing your courses, and people who are sitting in one class or taking one course together might actually be part of 5 or 6 different degree programs, right? Some people might be in a PhD program, some people might be in an MA, some people might be in an LLM, some might be in an MPP. What courses you choose really reflects your interests and the fields that you want to work in after, right? Barring 1 or 2 very basic intro level courses, which are there for people who don't have a background or like studied that a very long time ago and want to refresh. So barring something like, introduction to statistics or like introduction to economics, the so those introductory courses might have like very regular quizzes and classroom exams, right? Most other things, actually, the professor will decide how they want to evaluate it. So it could be anything from like a single final paper like we are used to in India, to like multiple essays, to simulation exercise, debate, public speaking exercise, mix of essays and quizzes, mix of assignments, client consulting assignment where actually your client gives you part of your grade. Uh, it really depends on the course and the faculty member. And not just that, especially in your second year in an MA, actually, if you have like a plan, like you're working towards some particular kind of thesis or something, you can even go to your professor and say, as part of my plan towards my thesis, this is what I would like to do as my graded assignment for your course. And even if it's actually different, they might make an exception, basically, if you give a good enough reason, many faculty members are willing to be flexible like that because, again, except like that intro to statistics kind of course, they are not really checking your knowledge, right? They are checking your ability to apply your understanding of that subject to some real world problem, right? So it's really more interested in sort of your creativity and your like ability to apply more so than like, can you solve this sum or can you solve this particular question. um Rigor, so uh I suppose I shouldn't say this formally, right? But informally, if you talk to alumni of any school, they will tell you that they rank courses based on like how much hard work is required and like how easy or how difficult is it to score a particularly good grade, right? So there are courses that are considered relatively light, and there are courses that are considered like relatively heavy. Uh, but it's again, it's really more a function of what are you interested in. If you pick a course that you're interested in, you're probably going to get a good grade because you'll put in the work and it will show, and the faculty will also be able to tell that you're interested in this subject and trying to apply yourself to it.
So, sir, did the master's course there benefit you here? Any memorable experience that you wish to share in a nutshell?
uh so the joke at Fletcher is that Fletcher prepares you for the job that you're going to have 5 years after grad school. Okay, because you graduate typically with the kind of training and mindsets and sort of uh, strategic view that somebody at like a mid senior level would have. But usually you're like in your mid 20s and you don't have quite the same level of actual work experience that somebody there would have. So by the time you get that level of experience, right, you've actually had more and more chance to apply that kind of training. um, in point of fact, both the jobs that I got in India, I got through Fletcher alumni, right? So in a very direct way, it certainly has like helped me. Uh, as I grew more senior in those roles, I did see this dynamic that I was describing play out. So uh, in in any organization, if you have like a mission that you have to complete in a year, one of the things that you'll be most concerned about is what are the risks? What might go wrong that would prevent me from doing this, right? And I think that the stuff that I studied, right? I studied conflict resolution, I studied development economics, I studied program design, monitoring, and evaluation. Uh, I studied basically how to apply systems thinking to various different contexts. Uh, that has really helped me think about and anticipate risks and to highlight those to people saying, hey, this is our plan. If all goes well, great. However, have you considered if that piece does not happen? What are we in? And back to what I was saying, right? Then you can develop contingency plans around that, right? That is a relatively senior manager sort of way of approaching problem solving, right? Build a system, assess risks, make contingency plans. So definitely, I think what I studied has helped me with being able to work that way.
So, sir, as far as scholarships and accommodation is concerned, I think we can let it pass because it changes every year, and students can very well look it up on Google and find it for themselves. So, I don't think we should touch accommodation and scholarships. But and lastly, sir, is we now that we are at the fag end of our session segment, who was your mentor, if at all, if you had anyone, and what would be your piece of advice to all the young law students, graduates, lawyers who wish to apply to Tufts University for this master's program?
Mm, so I didn't have a mentor exactly. Uh, I had a couple of close friends who like helped me, like gave me really good feedback on my SOPs and essays and things like that. One was actually my colleague in Dr. Tharoor's office. Like she was a LAMP fellow, the Legislative Assistant to Member of Parliament program. She was the Lamb Fellow to Dr. Tharoor that year, and we are actually still very close friends, and we still review each other's writing, and so that partnership has been kept going. Uh, Professor Daswani at GLC was also very helpful to me. Nitin Pai, who's the founder at Takshashila, and so also was one of my teachers then in the course, was very helpful to me. At least like they gave me sort of confidence boosters saying, you're thinking about this the right way, apply, see what happens, go ahead. And they both gave me letters of recommendation as well. So of course that was part of the process. Um, Fletcher also has a very, very active, very, very friendly alumni community. So from the minute I applied, basically the admissions office said, here are some alumni in the same city that you are. Do you want to go meet them? Do you want to talk with them? Ask them about the course, etc. And they were very helpful. In fact, even after I landed up in the US, a couple of them were like, again, messaging and checking in on me saying, hey, did you get there? Have you settled in? How are you feeling? How's the first week been? How's the first couple of weeks been? Are you settling in? So it was very genuine, very kind of them. And I mean, I think all of us who've graduated also try to pay that forward. We continue to connect with prospective students. We continue to connect with admitted students, try and support them. So yeah, not exactly a mentor, but a very good support network, I think. And definitely that helped. Um, my advice for anyone who's interested in this field, um, can I interpret the question slightly more broadly and just like say advice to anyone who's thinking about graduate studies per se? Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely, sir.
So I would say there is never any urgency around graduate school, right? So if you are getting to do what you consider good and interesting work, uh, and you're getting whatever you consider decent salary or money for it, uh, keep doing it, right? And if there are topics that interest you, today there are many, many, many ways to actually educate yourself on those without having to take up a full graduate program, right? So actually explore some of those avenues to study some of that stuff part time, online, whatever the the resources that are available to you are. Um, when you reach the point where you feel like the next step in your career is not possible without some sort of specialized degree or qualification, right? And what qualification will, of course, depend on what direction you want your career to go, right? The Fletcher L.L.M, for instance, is not a trade degree. It's not really a practitioner's degree. It's a much more research and academia focused degree. So if you do the L.L.M from Fletcher, you're basically establishing that you have a certain depth of knowledge of international law, right? But how many day-to-day professions involve the practice of international law? Only a handful, right? Uh, so you have to believe that the career that you want to work in will be significantly advanced by going into a graduate program, and that could be a 1-year LLM, it could be a 2-year MA, it could be a PhD. Um, but take it at the point where you feel like the next progression in your life and in your career requires this kind of jump, right? Short of that, I would say, especially if you haven't worked yet, like if you're in like the first 4, even 5 years of your career, it's worth sticking it out and exploring, right? And then saying, okay, I think I've sort of explored the possibilities here. It's time for grad school and time for like the next step. Uh, Especially for people who are looking to study in the US. Because the other question we keep getting asked is like, what are placements like thereafter, right? And the job market is tough. The job market is tough. If you study international relations and international law, there are only so many organizations you can go to work for, right? The UN system is not easy to crack into. The World Bank system is not easy to crack into. Professionally, you will be fine. You will have like an interesting career. You will, if you've taken loans, you'll get to pay them back. It might be done in 2 years. It might take 12 years. On average, 7 to 8 years, you'll be financially stable. You'll get to do interesting work. Uh, but it will be a struggle. It will be a scramble. All of us, as I said, we've sort of taken these like diagonal career trajectories. There is anxiety involved with like making that kind of switch, right? So you have to be mentally prepared for the fact that you're going to invest anywhere from 1 to 5 years of your professional life getting that kind of specialized qualification. It will help you. It will not magically catapult you into the career that you want unless you're really, really, really lucky, right? But it will make it easier and more plausible for you to do that. And it will open up new opportunities that you didn't have before. Then you will have to think on your feet and respond to whatever you have there. Uh, and especially in the US, I think last thing I would say for people looking at policy courses today, more and more graduate schools in the US are introducing what are called STEM coded policy courses. So the amount of time that you can live and work in the US on a student visa varies based on the course that you take. If you take a science, technology, engineering, mathematics course, which is STEM, you can stay and work longer. And more policy schools are introducing courses that are STEM coded. So if you have the option to apply for and take one of those, it's just easier and better for you career wise to do that than to take one that's not, unless you are already clear that you want to come back and work here, right? In that case, sure, your choice is wider. But if you're looking to stay and work in the US, a STEM coded course will help you more. It will make employers also be more likely to hire you because you can stay there for three plus years as opposed to having to come back after one. Yeah, let me stop there.
Thank you so much, sir, for taking out time for doing this session for us. It was indeed a very insightful session. It's an absolute honor and privilege to speak to you today, sir. Really means a lot to me and my team. To all the viewers who are watching, our email is mentioned on the channel. In case if you still have any queries, feel free to write to us. Email is mentioned, and we'll be more than happy to assist you on any query in case if you have both practical or academic. And you can very well even write to sir directly. So, sir, anything that you wish to say as parting words before we wrap this up?
No, just to say thank you again for doing this. And yeah, to echo, people are most welcome to write to me. I think you can share like my LinkedIn profile. They're welcome to write to me there. Uh, Parting words. There are lots and lots of great books on how government works, on how policy works, on like how economics or economic history works, on how the constitution was written, on how India's first election was conducted. Uh, read widely, read omnivorously. Uh, this is the stuff that will help you identify the particular questions and areas that you're interested in and want to work more in. And it will already give you sort of a jump start on what kind of resources, where can you go, what can you study, whose work can you read, all of that. So yeah, just a plug for not even a specific book. Just like walk into a bookstore and look at like the like modern history section and pick up anything that interests you.
Very well, sir. Thank you so much once again. Next episode's on its way. It's goodbye for now.
Thanks, Jay. Take
Goodbye,
care.
sir.